Hello Year 9 and welcome to your first English lesson online. I hope you are well, I hope you are staying safe, I hope you are staying at home and logging on and doing all of the Fernhill online lessons on YouTube and Show My Homework. We are going to be learning about the Gothic Horror genre, and for this lesson you need to have pen, paper and maybe an exercise book if that's what you've got there, and a dictionary might be helpful, but I'm going to help you with some vocabulary. So let's start. Okay, so we're learning in this session to identify how horror writers delve into our fears. In other words, how do they make it scary? We're also going to look at the way that writers create the right setting for the horror genre and how the setting is crucial to creating the right atmosphere. So without further ado, we're going to start with one of my favourite ways of looking at any genre is a micro novel. So this idea that you can write a complete novel in just 2 sentences. And yes, it can be done, and I'm going to show you some now. Okay, so can we do it with Gothic horror? Can we make it scary in just 2 sentences? Well, I'm going to let you be the judge of that. I'm going to show you some now. So the first one, I began tucking him into bed and he tells me, "Daddy, check for monsters under my bed." I look underneath for his amusement and see him, another him, under the bed, staring back at me, quivering and whispering, "Daddy, there's somebody on my bed." Okay, what do you think of that one? What about this? Growing up with cats and dogs, I got used to the sounds of scratching at my door while I slept. Now that I live alone, it is much more unsettling. Don't be scared of the monsters, just look for them. Look to your left, look to your right, look under your bed, behind your dresser, in your closet, but never look up. She hates being seen. The last thing I saw was my alarm clock flashing 12:07 before she pushed her long, rotting nails through my chest, her other hand muffling my screams. I sat bolt upright, relieved it was only a dream, but as I saw my alarm clock read 12:06, I heard my closet door creak open. You get home, tired after a long day's work and ready for a relaxing night alone. You reach for the light switch, but another hand is already there. And there we go. So have a little think. Which story do you think was the most chilling and why? I quite like the simplicity of, I think it was the last one. Let's go back. Yeah, I quite like the simplicity of this one. It's not complicated at all. It's written in the second person because we've got you get home. So it's like really direct to us. You get home tired after a long day's work and ready for a relaxing night alone. And there's nothing sort of horror about that first sentence at all. So you're kind of sort of lulled into a false sense of security. You reach for the light switch, but another hand is already there. It actually isn't sort of chilling at all in any way until you get to the last few words. So I think that one's quite clever. But to be honest, they're all good. I like all of them. Why then do you think that each story is set within the home. None of them are set in graveyards or any other typical sort of Gothic horror settings. They're all set within the home. Why do you think that makes them quite effective? I suppose you could think about the fact that home is meant to be our safe space, isn't it? Home is where we come to if we were scared. This is where we would run to. So actually, creating that sort of fear within our safe space makes it even more scary. And also, we're probably all sitting at home while we're reading these. So again, that's tapping into our fears of not feeling safe at home. So now I'm going to send out a challenge to you guys. This is your task. So if you fancy a bit of fame and fortune and you want to see your words published on YouTube, then what I would like you to do is to send me your 2-sentence horror story, and then yours can feature in the next live lesson. Okay, be as creative as you want, but it must only be 2 sentences. Okay. So, moving on, we're going to have a look at an extract which is beautifully written. It's by Daphne du Maurier and it's called Rebecca. Now, there's nothing remarkable about the title at all. It's just named Rebecca, but it is a Gothic horror novel, and much of the way that the writer creates this atmosphere is through the description of the setting. The setting is almost another character in this novel. We can learn a lot from how Daphne du Maurier has written this extract. So if I can just get you to have a look over here, you will see that we are looking at these things on the left hand side. So we're going to pick out words and phrases that build our impression of the setting. We're also going to look at how the narrator feels about the setting and how the narrator is affected by the setting. Okay, so there's those 3 things that we are looking at. But just before we start, it would be a good idea for you to write down the title, and we're going to look at these words here. This vocabulary I think is really useful for us to pick out. So we've got this here, the word surging, coming from surge. And when something is surging, it means it is moving forward at great force. And it's powerful. So it can be a crowd of people surging towards the finish line, or it could be, as in this case, it could be the waves of the sea surging powerfully and moving forward. So make a note of that new vocabulary in your paper or your exercise book. And then the word sullen sort of means somebody who is really a bit sort of moody. And I'm just going to check here what it says. Sullen, bad-tempered and sulky. So yes, I hope none of you are feeling sullen right now. So that's quite a good word for us to use. And persistent, I'm sure many of you already know what this means. But when you are doing something and you're not letting anything stop you, no obstacles in your way are going to stop you, you're being persistent, you are continuing to do something even though it's difficult. But it can also mean when something is persistent that it doesn't really stop, it goes on and on and on. Hopefully you're thinking that I'm being persistent right now. But the other side of that is the word seized. So to cease something is to stop. So to cease is to bring to an end. We're not seizing this just yet. So stay with me. And then this word, I like this word, clamor. It's this idea, it's a noise. So the clamor of something is this noise of shouting, let me have a look. I've got the dictionary up here. A loud and confused noise, especially of people shouting. So there you go. So make sure you have those words in red written down. All the vocabulary that we're going to be picking out of the extracts and the stories that we're going to be reading. We're going to revisit these words, and you're going to be learning them and using them in your writing. Okay. So let's start by reading it through, all the way through once, and then we shall go back and we shall start picking out words and phrases about the setting. The weather was wet and cold for quite a week, as it often can be in the West Country in the early summer, and we did not go down to the beach again. I could see the sea from the terrace and the lawns. It looked grey and uninviting. Great rollers sweeping into the bay past the beacon on the headland. I pictured them surging into the little cove and breaking with a roar upon the rocks, then running swiftly and strong to the shelving beach. If I stood on the terrace and listened, I could hear the murmur of the sea below me, low and sullen. A dull, persistent sound that never ceased. And the gulls flew inland too, driven by the weather. They hovered above the house in circles, wheeling and crying, flapping their spread wings. I began to understand why some people could not bear the clamour of the sea. It has a mournful, harping note sometimes, and the very persistence of it, that eternal roll and thunder and hiss, plays a jagged tune upon the nerves. I was glad our rooms were in the east wing, and I could lean out of my window and look down upon the rose garden, for sometimes I could not sleep. And getting softly out of bed in the quiet night, I would wander to the window and lean there, my arms upon the sill, and the air would be very peaceful, very still. I could not hear the restless sea, and because I could not hear it, my thoughts would be peaceful too. They would not carry me down that steep path through the woods to the grey cove and the deserted cottage. I did not want to think about the cottage. I remembered it too often in the day. The memory of it nagged at me whenever I saw the sea from the terrace, for I would see once more the blue spots on the china, the spun webs on the little masts of those model ships, and the rat holes on the sofa bed. I would remember the pattering of the rain on the roof. Okay, there's our extract. It's very much focusing on the setting, and it is creating a real atmosphere in this novel. So we're going to have a look now at how the writer has created that setting and what they have done. So picking out some words and phrases that help us to create that atmosphere. So one of the things you can do is you can pause the video now, and then you can reread it yourself. And you can make a note now of all the references to the setting that you think build an impression of the setting and what you think that impression is. So if you'd like to do that, you can pause now and do that. Okay, hopefully you've had a chance to pause the video and make a note of all of the words and phrases associated with the setting and think about what impression that gives us. So if I now bring up our next slide, I'm going to show you what I came up with. So all the bits in green are the bits that I think are really focused on this setting. So, oops, bring that back, sorry. So let me start with the first sentence. Straight away, it's focused on the weather. So the weather was wet and cold for quite a week. So we know that it's dull, it's damp, it's cold, it's been like that for a whole week. It's already setting the tone. I mean, I know the weather in England is like that quite a lot, but I think we'd have a very different atmosphere if in the first sentence we had a blue sky, we had the sun out, we had a warm breeze. It'd be completely different. So the fact that we've got this wet and cold and it's been like that for a while, I think really does sort of start that tone. And then we notice that the sea is seen from the terrace. And what we notice about it is that it looked grey and uninviting. Now, I've been to many a beach in the UK, and quite often beaches here do look grey and uninviting, especially if there are dark clouds in the sky. So I think, I can picture what that looks like. It can look quite moody and quite atmospheric, but it's certainly not a sort of happy image. And then we have this picture of the waves surging into the little cove and breaking with a roar upon the rocks. So there's a couple of things going on here, isn't there? There's the surging, this kind of powerful force moving forward. So it's not a lovely kind of soft crashing onto the beach. It really isn't. It's got a lot of movement to it. It's got a lot of power to it. And we get a second description here of it roaring upon the rocks. So, this kind of almost idea of it being quite, sort of, like an animal at this point, and if animals that roar are quite scary, they're predatory. So perhaps this sea that's crashing upon the rocks is actually, quite dangerous and quite scary. So that's the impression we're getting already in the first few sentences. And it's running swift and strong to the shelving beach. So, this is no sort of lovely, relaxing walk across the coastline. This is a strong, powerful, dangerous coastline. Now we get a bit of sound here. You can hear the murmur of the sea. Murmur of the sea. That's interesting, isn't it? This idea of something murmuring as a sort of a low noise. Could even be quite annoying. It's not a sort of happy sound, is it? And it's sort of there in the background. So something almost quite unsettling as the sound in the background. And then we get a bit more description of it, low and sullen. And we'll remember what sullen means, sort of quite moody. So this sea, it's got a bit of a personality. It's quite moody. It's quite sullen. And it's dull as well. And then we've even got the fact that these gulls, they are behaving really strangely as well. So I've kind of included this into the setting as well, because the sea seems very unsettled, and then we see that the gulls are very unsettled, wheeling and crying, flapping their spread wings. I like that extract there, that little quotation there, because I like the way that the writer has used ing verbs at that point, because it shows that the action hasn't finished. It's in the middle of the action. It's an action that's continuing. So just like the sea is continuing, even the movement of the gulls is continuing, wheeling and crying, flapping their spread wings. And when you look at these verbs, crying is, not what you would normally associate with birds. So their cries, it's not bird song that you can hear cries of them. So that's got a sort of ominous sound to it. And the flapping of their spread wings, they seem unsettled. And so when nature is unsettled, we feel unsettled. And then we've got the clamour of the sea. So we know that the sea is making some turbulent noise, and it's not a sort of happy, calming noise that we often associate with the sea. And we're told it has a mournful, harping note. So if we were to put it to music, it would be mournful, the kind of music you might have at a funeral, full of sadness. And I think that's very interesting, coming from the sound of the sea as something that's very sad, and not something to be celebrated. And then it gets a little bit more intense, because then we're told that it's very persistent, that eternal roll and thunder and hiss. So the sea is making roll, thunder and hiss sounds. So we associate this idea of thunder, a storm. It's something that is unsettling in nature, but hiss, it's almost got that sound of evilness, hasn't it? Like the sound of a snake. So this sea is now growing into a character in its own right. Something that is not to be trusted, something that's scary, something that's powerful, something that's dangerous. Okay, so as we move on, we get to the end, and she refers to the fact that the sea is restless. And also right at the end, we end with the pattering of rain on the roof, which I think is really interesting, because the starting sentence was about the weather being wet and cold, and it's ended with the pattering of the rain on the roof. Some of you will be aware of cyclical structure here, where we're referring to something in the first sentence, and then we come back to what we've referred to at the end, a nice neat circle. And so we're right back where we were at the beginning, back to the weather again. So clearly the weather is very, very important to how the narrator is feeling. Now, did you get lots of that in your notes? Hopefully you did. Now, that's the first bit. Pick out words and phrases that build our impression of the setting. So there's an awful lot to take away from that. How does our narrator feel about the setting? Now, this is a bit more challenging. I think picking out description of the setting is perhaps a little bit more obvious than it is when we're actually looking for how the narrator feels, because now we're going to need to use our inference skills. That means that we're not going to be told how she feels, but we have got to understand the words that are being used and make our interpretations about what that means. Okay, so before I move on to my next slide, you can now pause this video, and now you can have a go at picking out a few quotations from this extract that shows how the narrator is feeling about the setting, and just have a go with your inference and your interpretations about how they're feeling. So you can do that now. Okay, now if you have, hopefully you've done that. You've paused, you've had a go, you've read this, and you've come up with some quotations. If you have, well done. I'm going to now go to my next slide, where you can see that I have added some purple sentences here that I think show how the narrator is feeling about the setting. Okay, so we come up here and we see there's all this description about the sea. And then we're told that persistent sound that never ceased. Now, what do you think the narrator feels about the sea just from that little quotation? A persistent sound that never ceased. Do you think that's something that the narrator is enjoying listening to, or do you think that the narrator's not enjoying that at all? I think if you chose the second option, I think you're right, because actually when you're saying something is persistent, sometimes that's not particularly a positive way of describing something, is it? It's persistent, it's always there, and perhaps you might want a break from it. And the fact that we've had this extra bit of information that it never ceased, it's almost as if the narrator wished it would, and it won't. So I think we can infer here that the narrator is really not enjoying the sound of this sea at all. We're not told that, but I think from the use of word persistent and never ceased, I think we can infer that the narrator is not enjoying that sound. And then that is backed up when we get the very persistence of it. Again, we are told that it's just not stopping. And clearly it's, bugging the narrator at this point that it's just not stopping. It's just persistent, as crashing waves are. And this one, I like this one. You remember that it's described as an internal roll and thunder and hiss. Well, we get this as well afterwards. Plays a jagged tune upon the nerves. So you will know if something gets on your nerves, something annoys you, getting on my nerves. It's just something that you're annoyed with and you've had enough of it. So here, it's not only something that's getting on her nerves, it's playing a jagged tune upon the nerves. It's playing with her nerves. And it's not just playing anything, it's playing a jagged tune. Now, it's interesting, isn't it? I like the use of this word, jagged, because jagged means something sharp, doesn't it? And so if it's a jagged tune, is that a nice, soft, soothing tune, or is it a harsh sounding, quite annoying tune? Yeah, I think so. So this is something jagged can hurt you. So perhaps it's more than just getting on her nerves. Maybe it's actually doing her damage. It's hurting her, this jagged tune upon the nerves. This is something quite serious for the narrator. So I think we can infer there that the narrator is not a fan of the sound of the sea. And then we also see that for some times I could not sleep. So clearly the setting is having a physical effect, not just an emotional effect, a physical effect on the narrator. They are unable to get a good night's sleep. So therefore they are disturbed by it. So we go back to, the idea of all the gulls flapping around. They are unsettled. Well, even humans are unsettled by this. So, we are sort of reflecting the way nature is there. And then in this second paragraph, we get this idea, and because I could not hear it, my thoughts would be peaceful too. So at this point in the room, the sea cannot be heard, and therefore the thoughts are peaceful. So that suggests to me that when the narrator can hear the sea, they have thoughts that aren't peaceful, that are troubling, and therefore their mood is directly affected by the sea and nature and the setting. And so here we are looking at the third bullet point about how the narrator is affected by the setting. If we look down here, the memory of it nagged at me whenever I saw the sea from the terrace. Okay, so this word, isn't it? Nagged. So what do we infer from this? Clearly we don't know what the memory is, but clearly we don't know why the sea is a bad memory, but we know that the memory of the sea, even when the narrator's thinking about the sea, it's nagging. And I think we all know what that means, that it's something unpleasant, an unpleasant reminder or an unpleasant thing that is constantly at you, reminding you, you're hearing it, and it's there, and it's unpleasant. So we do get a real sense of the setting being incredibly important to this novel, because a large amount of time has been spent describing it in detail, and clearly it has a profound effect, quite negative effect, on the narrator. So we know that settings are really important in Gothic horror novels. And I would now like to move you towards your writing challenge. Now, I will be putting all of these resources onto Show My Homework at the end of this lesson. And what I would like you to do in your next lesson is to choose one of these pictures. Okay, now if you really don't like either of these pictures, I don't mind if you go and find your own picture, that's fine. But I quite liked these two, one being an indoor setting and one being an outdoor setting. And I think there's an awful lot you can do with these pictures. And all I would like, you don't have to name your character at all. The most important thing is the description of the setting. So, just a little sort of reminder that when you're writing your setting, I want you to think about using your visual description. So imagery such as metaphors, similes, personification. Colours are really important. Students often forget to write about colours, and you don't just have to write green. You can choose much more detailed colours like emerald or forest green or something like that. Detail's really important. So imagine you're zooming in on something small and you're describing its movements, and then you can zoom out and give us the whole setting. Powerful adjectives, always look where you can improve your adjectives, and hopefully you will be able to use some of the vocabulary we learnt today. Then I want you to remember to think about your sound techniques that you're going to put in there. So this really does have to be a sensory experience for me when I'm reading them. So think of using onomatopoeia. And you will remember that onomatopoeia are words that sound like the actual sound. Try and avoid cliched ones like crash and bang, because all students use those. Try and look for things a little bit more original than that. Okay. Alliteration always helps create an atmosphere. You might use sibilance, which is the repetition of the sound. That might create quite an eerie atmosphere. You might use plosive sounds, which are those harsh k, d, p sounds, if you want to create a sort of harsh atmosphere and environment. Don't forget touch. Include description about how things feel, and it could be how the atmosphere feels. It could be, your character touching a leaf. It could be that they see a rusty nail and they pick that up. Anything, just something. I want to be able to, really be immersed into this in a sensory experience. And then that, of course, don't forget smell. There is there a smell? I mean, I would imagine that this one here would be quite sort of dusty and mouldy smelling, perhaps. And this one might be quite damp outside. I don't know. But don't forget about all of those different descriptions as well. It's not just about what we can see. Then it becomes very 2D. To make it 3D, you've got to include all the other types of description as well. And if you can, try and use some of the vocabulary that we learnt earlier on in the lesson. Now, I'm really looking forward to reading your descriptions of a Gothic horror setting. They don't need to be long. Remember, less is more. Spend more time on the quality of it. Don't try and write a story. This is not about writing a story. I just want a short but a description that packs a punch. Okay. Now, you can upload it. If I just move that over here, you can upload it onto Show My Homework, and I will pick out some to share at the next virtual lesson. Now, remember, your new vocabulary is here. I would love to see you using some of this vocabulary in your description of a setting. Now, you can submit this to me in many ways, but I think the easiest thing is if you can send it through on Show My Homework, because then I can receive all of them in one place. That would be the easiest thing. If you're having trouble with that though, please do send it to me on email. It's just easier for me if it's all in one place. So if you are writing it by hand, that's absolutely fine. You can take a photograph of it on your phone and upload it onto Show My Homework like that. That's absolutely fine. And if you want to type it out and do it on Word, then you just attach a Word document. Okay, so I will look at those. Next virtual lesson, I think, is next week. So I'm looking forward to reading your 2-sentence horror stories and your description of a setting as well. Thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy your Gothic horror writing, and I'm certainly looking forward to reading them, and I will see you at the next lesson. Goodbye.